Okay, A, observing reason. Reason, as we begin here, is just the beginning of the process of reason's actualization as all reality. It will try to see itself in the objects before it, and eventually the object before it will be another self, leading to recognition, the goal and end of the book. So, only the concept, the self, exists. It is all reality. In fact, when two selves confront each other, what we have is one concept, as all reality, confronting another concept, as all reality. Reason, then, is implicitly all reality. We will watch it gradually actualize itself as it tries to find itself in nature and self-consciousness. It will do so by bringing the scattered individualities of nature and self-consciousness under universals, kinds, and laws. Our general question again is, why does reason, as observer, find it hard to discover classifications and laws in nature and self-consciousness? First, A, observation of nature, inorganic and organic. What is especially important to know is that Hegel is not here criticizing the science of nature per se, but only the observing reason of the empirical sciences as they developed from the 16th century up to Hegel's time. Hegel is not saying it is impossible to obtain a knowledge of nature, but rather that a knowledge of nature and spirit can be attained, but only by means of the concept, or true speculative reason, not an instinctive reason confined to the senses and mere observation. We will now look at 6 attempts. 1. Description. Observing consciousness begins by describing individual things, but soon finds that this activity never ends and does not satisfy reason. It is also not sure what is and is not an important object to describe. Also, realizing that some inorganic objects completely resist description as they constantly change in their relations to other things. This forces observation to distinguish between what is truly essential and unessential about an object and its sensuous properties. And this leads to 2, the classification of things into kinds, into the universals of genus and species. One problem concerns what is essential for knowledge and what is essential for the things themselves. The latter is important, for our artificial classification system really should accord with nature's own system. Our system should reflect a thing's and its species differentia, essential characteristics themselves. Thus, the distinctive marks of animals, e.g., are taken from their claws and teeth, since this is not only how we distinguish one animal from another, but how animals maintain and distinguish themselves from each other. The problem is the differentia, or distinguishing marks of a genus or species in a system of classification, are fixed, self-same, and unchanging, i.e., firm and settled. Thus, observation comes across borderline individuals, which even have the features of opposite species, and hence become unclassifiable, being neither plant nor animal, but also plant and animal. Reason, in pursuit of itself, of what is universal in nature, will next seek for the law that will explain the sensuous phenomenon, holding that the truth of the law is found in experience, which necessarily leads to experiment and induction. By law here, Hegel means a necessary causal connection between two things or sides, e.g., a bird and its element, air, or an object's outer and inner features. A law, thus, is the same as an explanation. It attempts to answer the question, why does something exist the way it does, i.e., have the properties it has, or behave the way it does? Hegel is quick to point out the problem with the confirmation of law by experiment. Observation believes that to know that stones fall when raised above the ground and dropped, you don't have to make the experiment with all stones, just a great number. But, Hegel says, this induction or generalization from a few instances can never lead to certainty, only to probability. Now, because inorganic things consist in sensuous properties and relations which bleed into other things and alter their identity, they lack the unity, self-identity, and free universality of reason. Hence, observation's next object will be 4, the organism or living thing, which does maintain its unity, self-identity, and free processive universality. Observing consciousness will first seek for laws that relate organic nature to inorganic elemental nature. For example, the influence of air, water, earth, zones, and climate on the individual animals will yield laws such as animals belonging to air have the nature of birds, to water, the nature of fish, to northern latitudes, thick, hairy pelts, and so forth. Laws that G.R. Treviranus espoused, a contemporary of Hegel. The problem is that there is no necessary connection, for example, between the concept of north and thick, hairy pelts, and the concepts of sea and air with the structure of fish and birds. Hegel also here notes that these laws are so superficial that they hardly do justice to the detailed complexity and range of the animals under observation. So far, reason has been unable to find itself in nature. Therefore, since a law, a cause and effect relation, could not be established between the organism and its environment, observation will next move to a cause and effect relation within the organism itself, which is called a 5, teleological relation. That is to say, the organism preserves itself in its relation to another. This means that it is its own end, telos or purpose, or the cause of itself, or cause and effect at once. The purpose or end of its activity eating and drinking, is not something other than itself, but simply itself. Quote, "The organism does not produce something, but only preserves itself. Or what is produced is as much already present as produced." End quote. The organism is thus the unity of cause and effect. Hegel further notes that since the difference between what it is and what it seeks, its end, is a, quote, "difference which is no difference," what we are observing in the organism is the same thing as self-consciousness, which is also the concept or reason itself. Thus, for the first time, self-consciousness as reason beholds itself in its object, the organism. This is the infinite it has been seeking. It distinguishes between, quote, "itself" and what it has found, which is a distinction which is none, end quote. The problem is that observing reason as only the instinct of reason does not see this, that the organism has its end within itself. Instead, it locates this end outside the organism in a transcendent intelligence or in environmental factors. Lastly, 6, the outer-inner relation. Having thus failed in its previous attempts to find itself in its object, observing reason now tries to find law in the relations between the outer and inner aspects of the organism. Specifically, the law that the outer is the expression of the inner. The inner comprises its organic properties or functions, sensibility, irritability, and reproduction. Sensibility is the organism's capacity of self-feeling and other feeling. Irritability, its capacity to react to stimuli, feelings and sensations coming from outside itself. And reproduction, the organism's capacity to maintain or preserve itself as an individual and as a genus by producing other individuals. The outer are those actual shapes or systems that correspond to the inner's functions. The nervous system to sensibility, the muscular system to irritability, and the visceral, digestive and reproductive systems to reproduction. The problem with law here is that there is no clear way to connect the observable outer with the inner. First, there cannot be a one-to-one correlation between sensibility and the nervous system, its expression. This is because, quote, "sensibility extends beyond the nervous system and permeates all the other systems of the organism," end quote. Also, sensibility is a universal property or function, and hence is not separated from reaction or irritability and reproduction. Secondly, because sensibility, irritability, and reproduction are universal, pervasive, fluid properties of the inner, they cannot be expressed in the outer as distinct and separate anatomical systems, a division which contradicts the unity of the organism. In Hegel's words, quote, "in the outer systems of shape as such, the organism is apprehended from the abstract aspect of a dead existence. The organism's moments, so taken, pertain to anatomy and the corpse. not to knowledge and the living organism, end quote. Thus, reason, in the empirical observation of nature, is unable to produce any valid laws per se, and is thus confined to making clever remarks, interesting connections, and a friendly approach to the concept. But, Hegel says, quote, clever remarks are not a knowledge of necessity, and interesting connections go no further than being of interest, while the interest is still nothing more than a subjective opinion about reason, end quote.